Welcome to LYLAS. If you grew up in the 90s, then you probably know what that stands for. But we love you like a sis. So, welcome to today's show. First thing I wanted to say, I was thinking about this on my morning walk, is I was listening to an amazing podcast this morning, and it had me thinking about a lot of stuff. She's got a huge following. Her name's Mel Robbins. If you've never listened to that podcast, it's incredible. But she was like, I don't know if you found us because we were on the Today Show, or because we won some sort of like Webby award. And I found her just scrolling through Instagram, but started listening to our podcast. But it got me thinking that you're not going to find Sarah and I on the Today Show right now. You're not going to find us winning awards at Webby or whatever the hell it's called. We are just two moms that chose careers in the field of psychology, and after 15 years of practicing, weren't feeling fulfilled in our roles anymore, or just felt like we needed a change. And so decided to try something completely different, something in a way that we could still serve our communities and like-minded women and men. And so we're just some average Janes over here. Uh, Doing a podcast. I laughed because Sarah had never even, I don't think you had ever even listened to a podcast whenever we originally said, whenever you called me that first time in November, and you were like, you want to do a podcast together? And I was like, hell yeah. I don't know how to do that, but yeah, let's do that. And you're like, I don't even listen to him, but we can figure it out.
Yeah, so here we are.
So here we are. And so yeah, however you found us, we do this completely for free. We don't have ads. We're not sponsored. We are just putting ourselves out there each week and hope to build a community, but also to bring support to other women in this midlife kind of era that we're in. So if you are liking us on Facebook or Instagram, or downloading our podcast each week and listening to it, that means so much to us. If you're sharing it with friends, it truly means the world to us. So thank you from the bottom of our hearts. This is our, what,
Mhm.
28th episode, I think.
I
I
think
can't
so.
remember.
Yeah.
And I read the other day that most people, there's like 3 million podcasts, first of all. Most people who start a podcast quit after 7 episodes. So I feel
Oh,
pretty good about that. We have tripled that at this point, almost quadrupled. Um, so yeah, we're doing the damn thing. We are so grateful to every person that tunes in and listens. And so thank you. I wanted to start by saying that.
no, that's so sweet. I totally agree. We're our goal is to share real stories of real people together, and just to, I guess, take part in all of that sharing, and with the gratitude totally in our hearts for everybody that's partaken in this, listened, commented, liked, all of it. It's been so fun, and we're looking
Uh,
forward to so much more.
for sure. I think we just wanted to try something different, and what has come has been so much better than we could have expected it. The reconnection
Mhm.
from middle school best friends, going from talking every couple months to every single day. And I think I was also thinking this morning about how I didn't realize how much I needed Sarah in my life as
Oh,
much
God,
as she
so
is now,
sweet.
in so many different ways. She's like the
Same.
biggest supporter. She is so reliable, always there.
Oh.
And I needed that. And I didn't realize that, I think, back in
Mm.
November when we took this on. So, anyway, just want
Aw,
to start with some love before we get into what it is
same.
like.
Our stuff.
Today's topic is toxic relationships. And we had this title scribbled down months ago to talk about, when we kind of do a brain dump and think about possible topics. And this was one that kept kind of resurfacing. And I feel like I've seen a lot of it lately in social media, and just one that I have kind of wanted to talk about because I think that there's so much to learn. If you've, I mean, I don't know anyone that has never been in a toxic relationship of some sort, you know? I mean,
Mhm.
it could be a partner, it could be a spouse, it could be a parent, it can be a sibling, it can be a friend, it could be a step parent or a stepchild, or, I mean, there's just so many, any relationship that exists. It could be a boss, it could
Mhm.
be, anything, any relationship that a person has can turn toxic or be toxic. And so, sort of wanted to break that down. We're going to cover how do you identify if you're in a toxic relationship? And then, can that be repaired? And then, how do you move on if it can't? And so, we're going to sort of break it down because I don't know, like I said, I don't know anybody that's never been in one.
Definitely. And it was whenever I was in clinical practice, it was probably, I mean, relationships were the number one problem that people would often present as exacerbating whatever it was that they were going through, whether it was anxiety, depression, general stress, their health conditions, constant caregiving, just feeling guilt, obligation, uh, a sense of overwhelming negativity. I mean, the amount of distress that an unhealthy or toxic relationship can cause on somebody is almost akin to living actively beside Chernobyl that is
Mm.
still emitting, radiation, and you're not allowed to live there. That is what a toxic relationship can be. It can be that bad, but not even like you can't see radiation, you can't see these things, but you can feel them. And the
Yes.
effects of them are just so permeating into every area of your life. And we just, I think, so often feel trapped within them. So, this is a good topic.
Yeah, I'm glad that you said that because when we think about mental health, we tend to identify like, I have anxiety disorder, I have depression, or whatever it is. But a lot of these things, if you really start to peel back the layers, you start to see that underlying some of these uh, illnesses are or disorders are toxic relationships on one level or another. And so it's so interesting to me when I think about my own life and when I was experiencing, really debilitating anxiety. Like I was definitely engaged in a toxic relationship, not with my partner, but I was in another toxic relationship at the time. And I think that that's so interesting that you say that because we tend to focus on the disorder and not look at everything, the whole scope of what's going on in our lives. Because we're people pleasers, most of us. I think definitely I am. And you tend to think, well, if I just keep trying, I can make this better. I can make this better, and that's I think that's one of those signs that you need to kind of look for in a relationship.
Mm-hmm.
Relationship's not building you up, not making you better, not bringing a smile to your face, a genuine love and joy to your heart, then it is probably not a good one.
No, that's definitely true. Yeah, relationships are supposed to help to foster growth, independence, um, warmth. They're supposed to be nurturing and not like condemning
Mm,
or obligatory in a different
hmm
way or um, impose a lot of guilt or just reinforce like negative consequences or thoughts and things like that. Like it's just really challenging, I think, to quantify all the different levels that an unhealthy relationship can be. And then on top of that, what takes it to that next level of toxicity? I mean, everybody can be in an unhealthy relationship, and those are like a mild sense of something. But to be in a toxic one, that's a different thing that takes a different approach to it.
Yeah, is that when you start to show like physical symptoms of some other kind? Would you say that that's sort of what deviates between being an unhealthy relationship versus a toxic one?
Yeah, I think that whatever you have going on in your life, if it becomes more intense whenever you are around that person or thinking
Mm,
about that person, then that is the sign that like that again, that radiation meter, whatever the hell that thing's called, is going off and it's
yeah,
harmful at that point. It's not just annoying. Like unhealthy relationships can be annoying, they can be challenging, but they're tolerable to a point, you
yeah.
know? But a toxic relationship, it's almost like it has this own sense of feel to it that can't be seen, but that just then consumes. It's consuming, I guess is the way that I would say it. That if you find yourself talking about this person all the time or thinking about them and it's not even like in a positive way, it's almost like that you're trying to fix them or
Hmm.
fix the
Yeah.
relationship or again, that there's something that is wrong
Yeah.
and you're the only one that's working towards something, or that you're the only one to blame.
Hmm.
Those are pretty narrow places to be.
Yeah. So, a couple of the signs of toxicity, we're just going to break down some of the things that you can look for to, because you may be thinking, well, how do I know if I'm in a toxic relationship? I can tell you from my personal experience, I've had a couple of experiences with toxic relationships, and one specifically that I'm thinking of today, um, without giving like too many specific details, but one of them, like, it wasn't always toxic, right? It definitely at some point was a very healthy, normal relationship, but there was a turning point where things changed, and I never quite felt comfortable bringing up how I felt, or that that person had hurt my feelings, or that I just something didn't sit well with me. And so I think that first of all, it should have clued me in that something was wrong, that I didn't feel like I could say to that person, this bothered me, this hurt my feelings. Um, if you can't clearly communicate your feelings, they're your feelings. You're allowed to feel however you want. If you
Mm-hmm.
can communicate that to someone, that's a sign that you might be in a toxic relationship. Some of the others, just from quick search here, constant criticism. If you're in a relationship with somebody that is constantly trying to like erode your self-esteem, or tear you down, or just kind of always biting back at you, like, in a negative way, that's a sign that things are turning toxic, or just that constant like disrespect, or a disregard for respecting someone. I always kind of I get really uncomfortable when I'm around two people and one disrespects the other, like blatantly in a group setting. Like that always makes me just want to like crawl under the table.
Yeah.
I get really, for some reason, I'm really sensitive to that. um, and I think that that's probably because there's a toxic vibe that comes with someone openly disrespecting somebody in front of other people.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. It's very brazen. And that's a matter of control too. You know, if
Mhm.
somebody is willing to do that in that kind of environment, then they clearly see themselves as being, you know, above high and mighty,
Oh,
above high and
absolutely.
mighty. And that's a different thing at that point.
Uh, I completely agree. You actually just mentioned the third one, which is controlling and
Mm-hmm.
manipulating people. And so they kind of, a lot of these things sort of go hand in hand, but like guilt tripping someone or using like tactics to control a person often indicates some sort of toxic relationship there.
Mm-hmm.
And then we all know people like this. I mean, I definitely have had friends or loved ones in the past, but if there is a partner that's trying to isolate you from your loved ones, from your family, from your friends, red flag, like not okay. That isolation attempt is definitely something that could be considered toxic. And
Mm-hmm.
then lots of really regular, intense fighting. If
Mm-hmm.
that's happening, you're also probably engaging in a toxic relationship.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. Or if you're afraid, if you're using the word like you're almost afraid to get in trouble whenever you're in a
Mhm.
relationship with somebody, that should also probably be a warning sign. Like if I don't do this, they're going to be mad, they're going to be upset. If
Mhm.
we're adults having those kind of thoughts about a relationship, that's a again, I know I'm using this saying a lot, like it's a different thing than a kid being worried, well, I didn't make my bed, I'm going to get in trouble. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
It's a different thing whenever you're an adult wondering if you're going to get in trouble with a relationship that you're in. Like, I
Yeah.
mean, unless you're like breaking the law, then I don't know that that's a healthy feeling to be associated with a relationship.
So let me ask you this, because you have a lot of experience professionally in dealing with toxic relationships. Can a toxic relationship be toxic for one person and not the other?
Yeah.
Like the
Hmm.
person and the only reason I ask that is because we typically think it takes two to tango, two to be in a
Hmm.
relationship, and that you're probably everybody's bringing something to the table. But is it possible for only one person to be really having negative side effects from a relationship? I don't even know if that's the right word.
No, I think that's a great word for it. And I think so. Yeah. And I think it's it's also important to acknowledge that, you know, you don't have to be a bad person um if you are the toxic person in a relationship. Like
Mm,
I know for a fact that I am a toxic person to certain people
mm,
because we've openly discussed that we are too toxic to be mixed together. This is a bleach and ammonia situation,
mm-hmm,
chemical reaction. Neither one of us really like the other person at all. So it is best that we just acknowledge that we are equally toxic to each other and that we just can't work together. Like there's
mm,
just no part of either one of us that are able to do this effectively or productively. And that in and of itself might even be productive and effective if you just acknowledge that I'm a toxic person in this relationship, you're a toxic person to me, and that just is what it is.
I guess to expand on that question a little bit, and I just want your professional opinion on this. We've actually never talked about this, so I'll be curious to hear your answer. But when I think back to that one toxic relationship that I'm referring to, and again, this is from my perception.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but if you're let's say, I was feeling some of those signs that we just talked about of a toxic relationship, yet I didn't feel comfortable
Mm-hmm.
communicating those. And I kept up the appearance of everything's fine, everything's fine, everything's fine. I'm gonna fix it. I'm gonna fix it. It'll be fine. I just kept rolling with it. Is that on not is that contributing to a toxic relationship by not setting your boundary and clearly communicating your needs and your feelings?
Yes, I believe that it is. It's almost like at that point, and I don't, you're reinforcing the behavior that's taking place because at
Mm-hmm.
that point, that person may or may not even be able to acknowledge or willing to acknowledge that they're doing something wrong or that they're doing something hurtful, but also they don't know. And all they're
Mm-hmm.
getting is positive, almost reward for what you're
Yeah.
doing. And so it just kind of, it just feeds this cycle in its own way because you are aware that there's a problem, but you're trying to be the only one to fix it. And that might be again because of fear of that losing that relationship, of conflict. A lot of people don't want to approach a situation that could become even more outwardly conflicted. We
Mm-hmm.
will hold on to conflict more internally. So
Mm-hmm.
whenever you were kind of going through that, there was this whole probably inner turmoil, inner discussions, thoughts, I don't know, replaying conversations that was happening in here, but not
Mm-hmm.
out there because we're afraid of that one. Whenever honestly, the one that's happening in here is the more dangerous of the two
Mm.
most of the time because whoever that is, Mary Jo is just out there living her best life while
Yep.
we're investing so much of ourselves in thinking about that other thing. And that takes so much energy
Mm-hmm.
from our spirit, from ourselves physically, emotionally.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I kind of feel like the best, if you feel that way, it's almost like, and this is kind of a graphic description, and I use it a lot in clinic, like that we have just cut off your arms and your legs, and we're not doing anything to stop the blood loss except pump more blood into you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It's not, I mean, it's not necessarily effective, but it's just, you're just continuing on with that. And so but it's hard because I think in recognizing a toxic relationship, um, there is the notion or the idea that it has to come to an end too. And
Yeah.
that in and of itself can be scary or it can be hard or considered a loss or
Mm-hmm.
even a transformation of times. And again, those aren't emotions that many humans like to experience. And so what we'll do instead is avoid. And then that just continues to contribute to the cycle.
Well, and I think especially when it starts to involve other people that you love
Mhm.
and that you know that it's going to have a negative impact on the people that you love. And so you're like, I can keep this up. I can deal with this, even though it's harmful or hurtful to me, because I don't want to hurt these people that I love. I
Sure.
think that's where you get kind of caught in maintaining a toxic relationship,
Mhm.
whether you mean to or not. I can certainly tell you I didn't mean to continue on and let it
Mm.
fester and until it eventually exploded. It just, I was trying to protect everybody, I guess, in some
Mhm.
way. And it's taken me a long time to come full circle on this and realize, again, I don't mean to say that the other person was a bad person by any means.
Mm.
I just think that the relationship turned toxic.
Mhm.
Like you said, they don't have to be a bad person.
Mm.
But in many ways, I was reinforcing the behavior by not telling my truth, by not saying this bothers me, by not being honest about my feelings. And
Mhm.
so, yeah, it's so easy to sort of just stay on the hamster wheel and just keep going and going and going. And I
Mhm.
think about people in jobs. I mean, how many people have a job and they have a toxic work environment?
Yeah.
And it's really hard to walk away if you, let's say you've been with a company for 15 or 20 years, you have great benefits, you have a ton of vacation time. You have all these people that you work with that you actually do like, but then you have these few toxic people that really make your day just living hell. It's really
Mhm.
hard to walk away from that when you've got all of these, you've got a family to support, all the things. And so we continue on and we continue to reinforce or engage in toxic relationships.
Yeah.
And so, we've talked about some of the signs of a toxic relationship, but let's talk about some of the impact, what that looks like, or what you might start to notice within your own life,
Mhm.
or within yourself to say, okay, this is really having an actual like impact on my physical and mental well-being.
Yeah. Well, I mean, even just to kind of hit on some of those areas that you mentioned, like within work, if it's a toxic work environment or, the situation you described with coworkers, productivity goes down.
Oh yeah.
Um, your absences at a workplace increase. Um, People will start to experience a lot more non-specific somatic complaints.
Mm,
And so, like aching, tension, not feeling like comfortable. Again, not like a specific pain, but just like, it's not even like a fibromyalgia, but it's just like an ache almost
mhm,
within your body. Sleeplessness. Sometimes you're not able to sleep whenever you're thinking about that person, an interaction, a date in which you're going to have to meet up with them. Um, Other things can be like, again, like GI upsets, because if you're getting stressed out, then that's going to mess with your stomach. But these are physical types of things, again, somatic things that we don't think are often tied to relationships, but
mhm,
they are because they have this emotional impact. And so anytime our emotional system then gets engaged, everything's going to go to hell in a handbasket. And then if you
mhm.
think that you're going to think through well in those moments, that's going to get all messed up too, because
Yeah.
all the things are just focused on different areas. Too many juices going for any of them to truly be, affected. And that's just what's happening with you internally. So
Mm,
imagine at that point then what is getting emitted off of you
yeah.
from being in that situation, and who else that could potentially affect, just because we are still agreeing to be engaged in this. So,
Yeah, as a society, we're so quick to treat symptoms, right? We're so quick to treat anxiety, depression, physical ailments, insomnia, whatever it is. You're taking your CBD gummies and you're all the things. You're doing some sort of like gut health reset or gut protocol, or you're taking your headache medicine, whatever it is, migraine medicine, but never really stepping back and thinking, okay, what's contributing to this?
mhm.
What could be a potential factor in what's causing these ailments? So, really interesting to me just because having experienced it, like as most people have, I'm not any different. I mean, I think everyone has. I mean, I'm sure I have been toxic to someone in the past. I'm just saying that really taking a moment to step back and look at, okay, what relationships do I engage in frequently, regularly that could be contributing to these ailments versus just pumping yourself full of medications? Um,
Mhm.
Medication, I've said it a million times on this podcast. I think it's appropriate in certain situations, but when you're if you've got a laundry list of ailments, you've got to
Hmm.
really think about, well, what's causing this? What's the underlying issue here? Which is hard for so many of us.
Yeah. No, I
Um,
totally agree.
so yeah, definitely looking at the physical toll that it's taking on you, also how it might be isolating you from your
Hmm.
supportive network and your friends. You know, if you're in a relationship, I know people that have been in relationships in the past, and that person kind of takes them away
Hmm.
from friend groups. You know, really starting to look at how you're being isolated, even though you might really enjoy your company or that person's company, if they are taking you away from other people that you love, or you're not seeing your family as much, whatever it is,
Hmm.
that's, you know, something to consider as far as impact of a toxic
Definitely.
relationship. And then if you're
Definitely.
completely losing your identity, which I think a lot of people can identify with that, if you've
Hmm.
completely lost the things that you used to be passionate about, you're like, I don't do that anymore. You know, I used to do that, but I don't do that anymore. I just don't have time. Do you really not have time? Or is that the impact of a relationship that you're in?
Right. Right. And yeah, that's again where are you not doing it because again you're afraid that if you do it, then there's going to be some negative consequence, getting in trouble, a fight, you know what I mean, an accusation, whatever it is, there's just this apprehension that has that negative undertone to it. That's a pretty good sign. And to credit your point you mentioned earlier, in again in my clinical practice, I know that sometimes we would call it a relationship ectomy, like we needed to.
Mm-hmm.
We're not doing a tonsillectomy here. We're taking out your tonsils. We're getting a relationship out of your life. And oftentimes, whenever folks would, do the hard work that that entails in order to make that happen, they would be able to come off of blood pressure medication. They'd be able to come off of
Mm,
antidepressants. I mean, huge life changes that affected multiple areas of their health were able to be achieved
yeah.
just because they quit associating with someone who was toxic and or they reframed the idea of the relationship.
Yeah.
And that in and of itself, as you kind of mentioned, might be a way to still have a relationship with someone but to not allow it to have the harmful effects.
Yeah, I think that was my next question is there any way to repair it? Like let's say you know the relationship has become toxic, whether it's your spouse, a parent, like I said, it could be anybody, a sibling,
Mhm.
anybody, boss, friend, anything. Is it possible to repair that relationship, or is it done? Is it do you have to just break free and walk away?
Right. Fun psychology answer, it depends, right? Um,
It's always gray,
that's
right?
always fun. But I would say that the two best ways to kind of approach and maybe go with this. Um, One is that if you've identified it as a toxic relationship, it can never be a healthy relationship as it stands in the current context.
Yeah.
So, this is an example that was all the time in my office. It would just be like a mother and a daughter kind of a issue or
Mhm.
something like that where the mother or even the daughter at that point had an idea of the relationship that they wanted to have with that person. Or this could apply to anything. I'm just using that as an example. And your idea of the relationship just does not match. And
Yeah.
no matter what you do, it's not going to. And even if what you think, want, desire, maybe you deserve, or maybe it's rational, it still doesn't matter because that's not what exists. And
Yeah.
so then in your mind, it's almost like you have to transform to what that actual relationship is now. Okay. And so maybe that person may have a biological relationship to you, but you really just have to see them as being someone different,
Yeah.
and that is the best way to kind of go about doing something. There is a very sweet elderly lady that I worked with and had no biological kids of her own, but did have a stepdaughter that sorry, I know. I'm so sorry. We're gonna have to break that one. But what happened with her is that while her husband was alive, she had this sense of family that kind of existed. But once he died, she still had the notion that this person was a part of her family.
Mm,
But then we had to just kind of, again, transform that relationship because so many expectations, so many emotions, so much hurt was tied to it that it
mhm.
had to be seen as now she was going to be the lady from church.
Yeah.
So no longer was she this person's daughter or your stepdaughter. We now have to see her as being the lady from church. Or
Yeah.
that this person is not going to be seen as your brother, sister, aunt, uncle, coworker. They're just going to be seen as the person that they are. And so by
Mhm.
taking the context of that relationship out, you're able to then have some type of manageable relationship with them. But that's the key is that you have to really take the ideas of like this person was my best friend. No, this person is an associate that I know.
Right.
And then that is how you're able to kind of negotiate that. But even that has its limit. So if that doesn't work, then your next option, and maybe only, is to just, again, have that relationship ectomy where it is gone.
Where it's just completely severed and you cut ties and say,
Yeah,
with light and love, I let you go.
right. And there's no, and to each their own. For me personally, once I reach that point, um, probably with anything, and maybe even to a degree at times of fault, but I do believe whenever it comes to relationships, um, that once that's done, that's just done. And then
Yeah.
I'm completely and totally, and what I mean like free of it is like I am 100% free of it. Like any emotional attachment to it, any worry, concern. It's almost as if things didn't exist in that moment, which is the best way for me to kind of move on with it. And at that point, the relationship is dead and the person's no longer there. And so everything's fine. So,
Yeah, I think that's hard for some people, especially you think about if it was a parent or a sibling, someone that you truly deeply loved and had maybe things weren't always toxic. Like I said, I think I truly believe that relationships can turn toxic. I think about, my dad, unfortunately, towards the end of his life when he was in the throes of alcoholism. He had, been sober for 25 years, and so the majority of my life, I never saw that side of him. But once that became at the forefront of our relationship, we, it became toxic.
mm-hmm,
Couldn't handle it. I couldn't handle the stress and the phone call. I couldn't handle any of it. And so I created that boundary, which I look back and I'm like, wow, that was pretty mature of me at that time,
mm-hmm,
thinking, I was in my 20s. But I just told him, I'm like, if you're drinking, I can't be around you.
mm-hmm,
And I had, because I had that, I needed to go into self-preservation mode at that point. And so interesting to me that I could do that with my dad and see it so clearly, maybe because it was so obvious, when someone changes so quickly, it's much more obvious and you're like, okay, this has gone toxic
mm-hmm,
versus like a slow burn with like perhaps like a friendship or like a colleague or something like that, where again, it didn't start out toxic, but it was like a slow burn. Maybe there was like an event that happened in the relationship and that caused things to turn toxic. Whatever it is,
mm-hmm,
at some point, once you kind of make that turn, you got to set that very clear boundary and communicate that. And that's clearly not something that I did well in this one particular relationship that I was in, with a friend. And so it's just interesting looking back, how easy it was when it was so clear to me, like, oh, things have changed versus, the other was more like a slow burn over time. It
mm-hmm.
changed. And I started, now I can see it very clearly, but, you know, several years ago, I couldn't see it. So setting that boundary, I think, is so important, but also just the first step is really just acknowledging that it's toxic. And that's hard in itself because, like you said, it's almost like a death. You're going to
Mm-hmm.
grieve, especially if it's somebody that you cared about, which most relationships are. We care about the person, but you're going to grieve that loss that is coming or
Mm-hmm.
that of what was. And so that grief takes over, that anger takes over. All those like steps of grief are going to play into the end of that relationship.
Hmm.
But you have to, I mean, first and foremost, you've got to admit that it's there. And I think if both people are willing to admit that it's toxic and willing to admit that they want to work on their toxic behaviors, you can come to some sort of resolution and repair a relationship. But you need both people to say, I'm willing to work at this. I'm willing to do better. It means enough to me to put in the effort here and to listen to the other person.
Yeah, yeah, I think that's definitely true. And again, you'll know pretty quickly, likely, if they're really in it. You know what I mean? And if their
For sure.
intentions are pure in terms of being in it as well.
Yeah, if it's only one of you, like say, I mean, you say your goodbyes because it's not going, one person
Mhm.
cannot change a toxic relationship.
Mm-mm.
It's just gonna, like we said, reinforce that. So, but let's say you have acknowledged it and you're saying it's okay, it's time to like cut our losses here and move on, whether that's a partner that you've been with, sometimes you've been with a partner 4 or 5 years, you might even live with them. It's time to cut ties with them. What would you say is the first step? Just reaching out and saying, hey, look, this is turned toxic. For me personally, it's having a negative impact. And I need like what's some steps that you would give your clients in the past as far as moving forward with breaking free? I don't know if that's, but getting out of a toxic
Yeah.
relationship.
I think that first, like you said, you have to acknowledge that you're in one, but then you also need to build up those around you that are supportive, that are understanding, like those healthy relationships, those strongholds that you have, um, need to know that you are going to be going through some type of like, this may sound real woo, but like more of a transformational kind of process, and that you're probably just going to either need space or need help, need, different things. And letting your core support system know that, I think, is important because,
Mm,
again, it's, um, I mean, the treatment for radiation sickness is pretty intense. You know what I mean? So you're going to need some help and some assistance in the aftermath of that happening. And so making sure that your support system is good, that you are taking as good of care of yourself as what you're able to do, within that kind of space, making sure that you're sticking to your habits, your routines, whatever your safeguards are
yeah.
important because it's almost like a protective shield that you're going to be putting over you.
Yeah.
Even if it's not going to turn into like a conflicted type of breakup, it's still important that you have this as part of your initial healing, even
Mm,
from it. And so those are the first recommendations with it. The second one is that anytime that you're going to be having a discussion with somebody who is toxic, and that you're ending the relationship or transforming it, I just think as a safeguard, it's important for you to let someone else know,
mm, yeah.
where you're going to have the talk, how long you anticipate it being. Make sure that that person is available by phone. And this may sound ridiculous that I'm like kind of jumping to this extreme, but I've seen a lot of shit. And I'm just trying to, just watch out for yourself here. I mean, if this
Yeah.
person has had this negative of effect on your life, don't just think that nothing is impossible from happening.
Right.
Um, but I do think it's important that you have safeguards in place, people that will check up on you, and that you have this conversation, um, maybe with them at like a park or at some place where that is open. So that way it's not, again, too dangerous within your own place and space with things, but also hostility and fights and negativity, depending on the severity of it, can leave an imprint. And not
Mhm.
one that is like a
Mhm.
footstep, but like an imprint on a space and a place.
Yeah.
And I just don't know if you want to have that within your home or
Right.
within a certain space. And so I just feel like it's best to have it in an open area that, again, does ensure your physical and otherwise safety with it too, but that also does not further leave another toxic imprint on whatever space and place that you're going to be in. And I mean, again, that may sound kind of woo or just a little bit too much, but everybody knows whenever you walk into a room that has that tension in it, you can
Oh
still
yeah.
feel it, you know, or whenever you enter this space, you may not be able to put your finger on it, but there's still that kind of like memory that's associated with it. Now, I know people can't, like, let's say it's a partner relationship breakup, things like that. You may not be able to move to a new place or get a new house. You can move around the furniture.
Yeah.
You can paint the place. You can do different things to change the environment so that that way that imprint isn't as um, impressioned there. But it's things that you're going to need to be able to do in the aftermath. Otherwise, it just kind of has a linger with it. But you need a plan. You need a breakup plan from a
Yeah.
toxic relationship. And again, following through with that with extraordinary boundaries and knowing the ache that can sometimes come from that, how more susceptible you might be to going down that, like, oh, I should have done this or maybe that, or
Hmm.
that kind of rabbit hole. Rabbit holes are not meant for humans to go down, so don't let your thoughts go down them either. Okay?
Yeah.
I mean, Alice had a horrible time whenever she was in Wonderland. It was not the greatest place on the planet, despite what it was called. Um, so really just be aware of those things in the before, during, and aftermath of it.
After. And
Mm-hmm.
prepare yourself to know that things are going to change. It's going to change the dynamic with other people, most likely, whether it's a shared friend group, like let's say you were in a relationship with a partner for a long time and you shared a lot of friends, like
Mm-hmm.
that's all going to change because they're going to feel awkward or feel like they have to choose sides or, that's going to get weird quickly. Um, and so you have to be prepared for the fact that that's going to change. If it's a relationship with a parent and that you're walking away from or setting a very clear boundary, your holidays are going to change.
Mm-hmm.
You may not see that side of the family anymore. You may not see those. I mean, it's not to say that you can't still have those relationships, but be prepared for the fact that people are going to feel uncomfortable or not know if you so that that's going to take effort and work in order to maintain those like innocent bystanders, the people
Mm-hmm.
that weren't in the relationship with you, obviously, but were part of the overall group that's going to be impacted in a breakup of some sort. And I think that's hard. And the podcast that I referred to earlier that I was listening to today, Mel Robbins, it was all about let them. That's the name of the podcast, and it's a fantastic
Mm-hmm.
episode. If you haven't listened to it, I highly recommend it. But it's about just there. Let's say you break up with somebody, and all of your friends decide to still be friends with the partner and not you. Let them let let things be the way they are. Let people show you who they are, and just life goes on. You will make new friends. You will date again, but you have to let things happen. You can't control
Mm-hmm.
the how the circumstances and how the fallouts. You can't control that, and that was really hard for me. I'll be honest. In the beginning, that was really difficult when this relationship I've referred to. It sounds like it was my husband. It wasn't,
Mm-hmm.
but I try not to be specific just in case someone's listening that knows me. But um, that was hard because I knew that it was going to impact so many people that I loved and cared about. And I knew that I was going to feel left out of things and that I was going to feel like they were choosing the other person versus me or whatnot. And I wish I had that episode to go back and listen to, 3 years ago to just say, let it happen, let it be. Now, almost 3 years later, I can say everything's going to be just fine.
Mm-hmm.
Everything's going to work out the way that it's supposed to. You got to let it be. And so if you're somebody that's going through, ending a toxic relationship right now, or this is really resonating with you, think,
Mm-hmm.
wow, I'm definitely in a toxic relationship. This is something I'm going to have to work through. prepare yourself because those are hard. And then go listen to Mel Robbins' episode on let
Mhm.
them, because it will change your mindset in controlling things that are just out of your control at the end of the day. If you're trying to control something, outside of yourself, then it's a
Mhm.
problem. And
Yeah.
you've got to let them do their thing and you do yours, because that's truly all we can control is ourselves.
Definitely. Yeah. And I'm glad you sent me that today too, because whenever you were texting me about it, I was like, okay, I'm going to listen to it. Um, it was perfect timing
Yeah.
for me, my life, some things that are going on in it. And it just, I mean, it just does come down to that. You just sometimes just have to just let it be and know that you don't have control over it, and you don't have control over how other people are going to respond to the situation either. And so, and they may never agree with your decision to also eliminate that person from your life. So, and just as a, kind of aside, I'm not just preaching based upon, research and clinical experience. This is life experience too. And
Right.
so, just to, again, not go real thick within the weeds, but technically, I have a biological sibling, and that is all that person is to me, period.
Right.
um, due to numerous things that have happened. And honestly, we probably just weren't ever meant to be like how you and your sibling are. Um, it just was what it was. But whenever you even hear me on the podcast talk about our like childhood, I always reference we. But if
Mm-hmm.
you know me, then most of the time I say that I'm an only child. Um, and I am again 100% at peace, and I feel good about that decision. I feel freed. I am I I mean, it sounds awful. Maybe it sounds awful. I don't know. I love it because that's where I have found the release from that. Now, my parents still struggle with that, and
Yeah.
that's theirs to struggle with. That's
Right.
not mine. And
Let them.
so, right. So we let them, and I've let them for over 15 years now, kind of do that, which again, everybody kind of comes to their own point and place with things, but it's not my job to manage their reactions to my decision.
That's right.
And
That's right.
so, that has been a very easy process, once you
And I
can.
think going back to what you said at the very beginning of this episode is that just because you're in a toxic relationship, it doesn't make the other person a bad
Mm-mm.
person. Your brother's not a bad person. You all just had a toxic relationship.
Yeah.
And you have to separate that. At some point, you have to be willing to say, in some way, shape, or form, I had a hand in this. I contributed in some fashion
Mm-hmm.
to maintaining a toxic relationship. That doesn't mean the other person is bad or evil or did me wrong or is a narcissist. What all the things. I mean, I shouldn't say all situations. I'm sure there are some toxic relationships where definitely one person is at fault. If someone is, we're not talking about somebody that's like abusing you physically, emotionally. We're not talking, I mean, although some of the things we talked about could be viewed as a form of emotional abuse, but
Definitely.
um, certainly like in the example that I gave of my dad, like his alcoholism was definitely a negative behavior, and it was the primary cause of turning that relationship toxic at that time. And it wasn't, if he was sober, it wasn't toxic. We had a beautiful relationship.
Mm-hmm.
But if he wasn't, it was toxic because the way that it was impacting me. And so I think it's just important to reiterate, we're not, you know, you're not going, oh, this is a toxic relationship because this is a bad person. Not necessarily. It's just identifying that this relationship is toxic and that it's having this impact on you. And what are you going to do to then move
Mm-hmm.
forward?
Mm-hmm.
Are you going to bring it to their attention, set boundaries, make a plan, what all the things? Or, are you going to ghost them and hope for the best. Don't do that. Don't ghost them. That's also a form of manipulation, by ignoring people.
Especially if you
But
go back. If you go back, then it's definitely manipulation. If you just go to them and say, fuck it, we're done, that's a little different. But yeah, if you go back, that's whenever, that's not okay.
it's reinforcing.
It's
You're either
not
going to
good.
reinforce the relationship by going back and pretending nothing's wrong or
Mm,
nothing happened, or if you just totally ghost, if somebody ghosts you, that's also a sign of manipulation, that they're
mm,
not playing. If they're not willing to have a conversation, at least to say or to hear you out or to speak their piece, then that's again reinforcing a toxic relationship. And it's hard. It's not easy. It's not easy to say, that this relationship turned toxic. I mean, those are difficult conversations to have. Nobody likes conflict. I don't know anybody that likes conflict. Um, but nevertheless, if it's having a physical toll on you, then you have got to do something about it.
yeah.
Speaking of toxic relationships, I'm about to go postal on my family that will not give me an hour to record this podcast. We're slamming stuff in the kitchen. I got my kids coming out of the woodwork. I'm like,
Hmm.
seriously though, don't stay in a toxic relationship. Don't let it bubble up until you explode. Recognize it, do something about it, and yeah,
And don't shame yourself for figuring it out.
yeah,
I mean, the thing is that maybe the toxic person isn't a bad person, as we've been saying, but also maybe they are. Okay?
right, right.
Maybe they actually are really bad, or just,
Mistreating you.
yes, not
I mean,
well on their own, whatever.
right. Or they've got some work to do on themselves as well.
Yeah, but don't judge yourself poorly for engaging in something and going down that, oh, I should have seen, I should have known. No, ma'am.
Yeah.
Like that's not even fair because of numerous factors. Just be mindful of going down. Again, rabbit holes are meant for rabbits, not for humans, not for our thoughts. And so
Yeah.
stay away. But get help if you need it. I mean, that was one thing that I think that you even mentioned. It's tough. And if
Mm,
you notice, or maybe even you're not even aware that it is the contributing factor to so much of your distress, it is very beneficial to go and get some professional assistance from someone to help you with these relationships. I mean,
yeah. To help you perhaps make the
mm,
plan or just to help you see, how it's impacting you or that it is a toxic relationship. Certainly, I think oftentimes I could have probably benefited from seeing a therapist during that time period because it was just so it was stressful. It was a hard time in my life. But I also look at what came out of it. Like if we a lot of the stuff we talked about, focusing on your self-care, focusing, prioritizing your mental health, prioritizing um, really evolving yourself and looking back and what's the lesson that I learned. You've got to
mm,
really look at your part, and then also there's a lesson in everything.
yeah.
And so never reflect and go shoulda, coulda, woulda. I mean, we all do that, but really start to look at, okay, what was the lesson in this, because
Hmm.
there's always one.
Yes.
So
Yes.
anyway, prioritize yourself, get some help, and then embrace some personal growth. That's
Yeah.
truly the best thing I think that you can do from personal experience. That is it's been incredible
I
for
definitely
me
agree.
personally. Anyway, I've enjoyed this episode. I
I
mean, kind
know.
of a heavy topic, but I really enjoyed this. I think because it's something that weighs so heavy on my heart,
Hmm.
and you're such a great resource. So
Mm,
check us out. Speaking of resources, check out our resource page at thelylaspodcast.com.
mm,
Check us out on Instagram and Facebook. Leave us a message, share this episode with your friends,
yeah.
give us a like, write us a review, do something. Anything that's free. We're not asking for much. We're just asking for a little love,
Hmm.
so that we can continue to grow this audience and this community. We're so grateful again for every download. Um, so yeah, join us
Definitely.
next week. We'll have a fun topic next week. We haven't
Hmm.
decided what it is, but oh,
Hmm.
actually, no, we do have next week's topic. Next week's a yuck too. but
it's an inspiring.
inspiring.
I
That's a
think it's a
great.
yeah.
We're all about inspiration.
Yeah, so next week we'll have a super treat. We're going to keep it under wraps for right now, but
Yeah.
if you want a positive, I mean, probably just have some tissues. I'm probably going to cry. I mean,
Mhm.
I'm just going to go ahead and just probably prepare myself for that kind of moment with it. But it's going to be a very, I think, inspiring, but very heartfelt, wrenching, beautiful, real life, real person story that we're very honored to be sharing with everybody.
Absolutely. We got another guest coming next week, another, midlife mama, going to get real raw, real, you know, honest. And it's a beautiful story overall. I don't even know how to say
Mm-hmm.
that, but a lot of hope. So check us out next week. Until next week, everybody, LYLAS.
We's out. See ya.